So let's talk a little bit about the Three-Fifths Compromise. Some people are familiar with the Three-Fifths Compromise, but think it should go away because it doesn't really count anymore, but I'm going to show you why it does count. The Three-Fifths Compromise was a decision made by our founding fathers that created the Constitution to kind of save our fledgling country that was falling apart by building a stronger federal government. When they did that, they were trying to figure out how much representation everybody should get. And so when you start to pick your House of Representatives members by the number of people in your state, then you start to get concerned about who counts. You might think just automatically everybody counts, but the group that they were concerned about at that time was the enslaved population. It's not rocket science. States that didn't have lots of enslaved people didn't want them to count. Because if they don't count, then the states that have lots of enslaved people won't get as much representation in the government, and then they'll have less power. The states that do have lots of enslaved people want them all to count, because if all of the enslaved people count, then they get more people counted, which is going to give them more representation in the government. So it was a power play back and forth as to how many people to count, or how many of them should count. I'm sure the North would say, you're not even treating these people as people, and the South would probably say every person deserves some sort of representation. We still see these types of fights back and forth sometimes with even counting the immigrant population that's not documented within our United States. And should they be counted even though they're technically not supposed to be here? Certainly states want those people to count because they have those people because they will want them, they'll give them more representation and more power. So it's not going to be shocking to you when I tell you the Three-Fifths Compromise decided to make each enslaved person count as 3/5 of a person toward the population. They're not voting, they are just being counted so that somebody else could get power out of it. So if you had 5 enslaved people in an area, 3 of them would count towards population. This helps states like Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, and Georgia, Delaware as well, gain lots of representation in the early portions of our country. Why it almost still truly matters today is because over the life of time where enslaved people were being counted but not being heard, I mean, they didn't get to vote, they didn't get to run for election. All of the states with enslaved people ended up getting more House of Representatives members. You're going to get more electoral votes, meaning they control the presidency. Another thing you're going to find out, the president gets to select Supreme Court justices. So for the first 100 years of our country's history, there was unbalanced power to these states that were driven by slavery in all of those areas and walks of life. A lot of those Supreme Court justices carrying way beyond the time of enslavement. And the mindset, the mantra would continue to carry, you could argue, even into today's society in terms of the influence that it has over the presidency and over the Supreme Court especially, and different people's views and opinions. So you would think it's just counting people for one seat in government, and in here it applied to so many layers of our country's strength at the federal level.